Okay, we're on. Thanks for that superb Japan morning with Hideki and from Mark and Jakub from RTB House. So thank you guys for some insights into Japan and also for the Japanese listening in on the Hopin platform. We're now transitioning over to Australia. We have Mark Keough in Australia, Nigel Standish, and Leila Henderson. So I think without further ado, I'll let them start this next panel, which will be moderated by Nigel, and a little bit of insight into the corporate world in Australia and in terms of what their technology, IT, digital demands are. So over to you guys. Thank you.
To investigate for IT outsourcing, and also the Australian market priorities. What are the trends and what's hot in Australian digital technology at the moment? And finally, if we've got some time, we will answer some questions. So welcome again. So just as a brief introduction to myself, my name is Nigel Standish. I am the principal of Standish Business Advisory, a firm that I founded that helps early stage companies and established companies with their strategy, goal setting, and ultimately capital raising and financial success. Before that, I started with KPMG in Adelaide and then did have a brief stint in Poland, well, brief meaning about 10 years actually, where I also worked for New World Publishing in Warsaw. On returning to Australia, I was involved in the media sector and then in a couple of software startups, one being an online ordering business called NoQ and another one being thereitis.com, which was 3D visualization software. I'd also like to introduce Leila Henderson today. Welcome, Leila.
Hi, Nigel.
Leila is the fellow from the New Venture Institute at Flinders University in South Australia. She is a very well-known Australian entrepreneur and founder of several startups, as well as operating an established tech company in the PR space. She has a background as a tech journalist, but also now as founder and CEO of Newsmaker, a SaaS PR platform with a customer base of over 18,000 companies. Something else will be very relevant to our audience today is Leila's involvement as founder of Condotto.com, which is a code-free programming startup that she's been involved in. And a couple of awards, Leila, I know, Women in Innovation IT Award and the Zonta Women of Achievement Award. So it's a long introduction, but very impressive CV.
Not long enough.
And Mark, welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
Mark Keough, Dr. Mark Keough, has over 25 years in internet-based learning and content development, something very relevant at the moment with so many people learning from home and school. He actually founded one of the world's first LMS companies in the corporate and education sector and has held roles with Qantas, ANZ Bank and Westpac, which are all leading companies in Australia. He was also founding vice president of learning solutions at monster.com. He's currently an academic at Flinders University and in his spare time is founding another edtech startup of which he is CEO called Intrinsic Learning. So thank you very much, Mark. So before we get the views of our expert panel, I just wanted to give a brief overview to our audience on, why Australia, I suppose. Why are you talking to us down here in Australia in the evening? But Australia's GDP, to give you an idea about the size of Australia, is 1.4 trillion. So that ranks at about 14 in the world. It has an IT market of $100 billion US, so very substantial. And that's growing at 6% a year, which is about double the global average. So there's plenty of work. We're also ranked 5th on the Global Entrepreneurship Index. So plenty of startups and early stage companies looking for reliable tech partners. Some of the main offshore markets that Australian IT companies source their work from include Asia, primarily due to the time difference. So, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and such. Also, there's a heavy concentration of work directed back to Europe, and in particular Central Europe, Poland, Ukraine and Bulgaria. And there has been a growing trend towards outsourcing in South America, which is quite interesting. You may think of Australia as a mining and agriculture and beach-driven culture, but we do have some substantial tech companies and a vibrant tech culture down under. The most prominent that you may have heard of is Atlassian, which is a global player listed on NASDAQ. We also have some companies you may or may not have heard of. Xero, an online accounting startup, Envato, Campaign Monitor, and Canva, which is a design software startup that again has had significant venture capital funding and is quite a success. So that hopefully gives you an idea of why you're talking about Australia and why it would be a very good market for Central and Eastern European tech companies. So that set the tone for that. But I would be interested to know, Leila, with your experience, just some of the points that you look for in a technology partner from Central Europe or in fact anywhere, both Australia, when you've been involved in some of your projects.
Okay, it's hard to just answer that right off the top of my head, but I'll just give a little bit of background. I have been involved in outsourcing IT projects for quite a long time, 15 years. And I've worked with a lot of offshore providers, India, the Philippines, Bulgaria, and I'm currently employing an absolutely great team in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So my summary is that it's not about the country, it's definitely about the people, and the factors that go wrong in IT can go wrong in any country. And so in terms of what you're looking for, I'd be looking for overall would be quality, the quality of the deliverable. And I guess every project has to start with a scoping exercise. And it's very difficult to know until you're in a project how you're all going to work together. So that's part of what I'd like to discuss in this discussion.
And Mark, have you got any thoughts on and experience on what Leila said, or your own personal experience?
Well, and for my part, I agree. It's certainly about connecting with people. And to that extent, sometimes countries do make a little bit of a difference in that, there is cultural difference between us all. It took me years to understand Leila because you may guess that she was originally from Scotland, but I've got used to it now. So the point about that is whatever the language we speak or whatever the cultural awareness we have, in the end, people are people, I find, and certainly people in IT have a lot of common interests. So the thing for me is, of course, the way people develop systems nowadays has changed significantly, and it's no longer good enough just to be a clever technician as a programmer. What's needed, and there's all that. There's these wonderful jargon terms that I've heard change over the years, I founded my first internet company in 1994. So I've seen the associated software development change so much in that time. But one of the things that has changed primarily is this notion of moving to a kind of full stack approach where connectedness between dislike systems and the notion that we've moved from being software companies to cloud service companies where the back end is is significantly, the connection of various different pieces of the puzzle. Certainly, we need that connectedness service as well as clever technicians and people with innovative ideas. The companies are rarely started by programmers. They're often started by people with an idea. And so assistance in translating the idea, I think, hasn't changed and it's become more important than ever. And the last point I would make is, of course, modern project management techniques, where we might not end up building what we start out thinking we're going to. And we have to be aware of changing market circumstances and allowing the markets to define our products. And so agility in any design and agility in relationships is critical.
Yeah, that leads on to it, that the agility actually creates its own problems because it requires even more sophisticated communication. You have to stay on top of the communication, and you have to stay on top, because if you start with a specification and you're continually changing because you have to, you need to make sure that everyone's on the same page all the time, especially with cost and time. That's what I've discovered.
Yeah, is it fair to say that it's no longer okay to say, well, that's not what you told us you wanted? The relationship needs to be more dynamic than that. And I still experience that a lot, actually, where people have the defense that, well, you told us you wanted this, and so we built that, but now you've changed. Well, the agility to move with the information and assist entrepreneurs and architects to deal with their own fragility is what's needed in teams these days, I think.
Yeah,
Nigel, I interrupted you. Yeah.
Oh, can I interrupt you too?
Would you say that it's how budget-driven is the decision to outsource development to other countries?
Well, I think the same of that. I don't think it's about budget. I think that people normally are very happy to pay for a quality job, definitely. After a lot of mixed experiences myself, just going for price is never going to work. You have to go for the deliverable.
On the other hand,
project management side of the budget add significantly to because you're not working, directly in the same location?
I don't think it makes that much difference, but I think there's an area of management that I find can be a waste. I hope I don't put anyone offside here, but I think that there can be too much IT consulting at the front end and just sort of going, which is just an endless pit for time and money. You have to get into the job because if the IT consultancy is not delivering value to the project, then it just becomes MBA speak.
And do you think there's anything unique in the Australian approach to startups or software development or IT in general, or are we just, Americans with a different accent?
I think we swear too much.
Let me start that ball rolling, and I just get already that Leila and I have had similar experiences, and even though Leila and I have known each other for a long time, we've never had shared experiences, so we are coming from very different experiences. We have very different companies. We've known each other through the startup community, and that's that's what we have in common. But what I think is that what's unique about Australians is that we are. Sometimes I talk about Australians as having a great sense of humour and an ability to pivot, but we also are surprisingly sort of precise in our requirements. And so it's no unusual thing that a place like Australia has these magnificent sporting organisations and great success in professional sport above our station as the size of the nation, that kind of thing, because we have a great respect for technical excellence in Australia, which is sometimes missed, I think, because of our laid-back attitude and our beaches and our enjoyment of the good life, But Australians do like technical accuracy, they do like precision, and they do have a good sense of humour. So if things change, generally we're kind of resilient and able to move. What Australia lacks, in my view, is that there isn't the capital for our field available in Australia that there is in other nations. So it's no strange thing that Atlassian actually, albeit Australian, listed on the NASDAQ. It's not on the Australian Stock Exchange. And the reason is that the Australian Stock Exchange is full of miners and agricultural people, and there is a certain culture in Australia about investment has to be tangible, and that software and IT services are intangible. So one of the things we often do is we have to generate revenues in order to do development. And so partnership in things and shared IP are things that are very attractive to Australian entrepreneurs, because we often don't have a favourable venture capital climate that creates the budgets we need. So that's the sense in which cost matters. I think it's more, in a sense, we're happy to pay, but cash flow is more challenged amongst startup companies. And so partnerships, shared revenue arrangements, shared equity arrangements, those things all work, I think, here. I don't know if those comments are helpful, but and others' views.
I mean, Leila, you're very much at the coalface, pardon the pun, of Australian startup community, particularly in Adelaide. Would you echo Mark's comments there?
Yeah, definitely. I think we can get into trouble with the sense of humour because it doesn't always travel across languages. But again, I haven't really had a lot of trouble with that, especially with the guys I'm working with at the moment. One thing I really want to say is that thing about how the client is driving the project, but also I think Australians very much like to collaborate and like to work through ideas. And if, as a client myself, how can I ask for what how can I ask for what I want if I don't know what's possible? And so we tend to look to our developer to also tell us what's possible. It's one of the reasons that projects change, of course. Yeah, so that's what I would add to that.
Well, it's sort of like the analogy of if you tell your developer to build you a three-legged table, well, they might build you a very good three-legged table, but when actually what you should have is a four-legged table. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
But then also we may have forgot that actually you need chairs too. And just to take the metaphor a little bit further, what we like is the idea that we might think you need chairs with square things, and we Australians are definitely open to, and not all cultures are, but Australia is definitely open to the idea that you might say, well, why don't you use round timber instead of square timber, and perhaps that'll add some benefits. So partnership, I think, is the key. The notion that we are partners in development and we'd like long, effective, agile partnerships rather than a short job, in and get the money, job done, met the spec, no, that's not our style, I don't think.
So really a value add type approach, that you're looking for partners who can improve the process rather than just build exactly what they're told to build.
Yeah, definitely.
And is there any language and communication issues that you've experienced, Leila, in dealing with your team in Bosnia, or apart from your accent?
It's nobody's commented on that yet. Yeah, they haven't had the nerve. Yeah. From a project management point of view, of course, there's lots of different systems that we use now, like Trello and Slack and Xero and so on. And I think that the thing is that you can have as many conversations as you like, but you have to have things in writing. And I think the thing that I've observed is that everyone starts off with the best of intentions, but then you just have to have a couple of things go wrong. Somebody just says, oh, I'll deal with that later, or I won't talk about the revised budget now, I'll talk about it later. And then, it just takes a couple of missed meetings, for instance, and then everything falls in a hole. So when you're working across time zones, you need to keep on it even more just to keep the momentum going for the project.
Well, that's another good question there. With regard to time zones, I mean, do you expect the offshore team to work different hours to marry up with your own time zone, or
only if there's a bushfire to put out? Yeah, and we have had to do that. We've had to have people on call for our customers to cover off when something's going live, for instance, for the that go live moment, just to make sure. And they've been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
And what about when it comes to the financial side of things? milestone payments, contractual stuff, Mark, and that's an area that I know you've spent some reasonably large budgets in your background.
Yeah. I've spent a lot of time on contracts and and all the difficult questions like international indemnity and risk and also IP management and so on. What I find is that when you cross boundaries, those things are much harder to deal with, and a lot more good faith is required. And so a good faith, reputation, references, a good track record, they're all important things. And I don't want to come back to culture, but it is important. I don't find language as an issue because as a general rule, English is the lingua franca nowadays everywhere, and so in the end, most people are dealing in English and that is a known thing. But culture is very different. And so Leila's already said Australian sense of humour doesn't always translate. Also, the notion of status and hierarchy. I think one thing that Australians share with Eastern Europe is a sort of healthy questioning of authority, and we can relate to each other around that. So you won't find me as a CEO not being able to be told that I've got it wrong in Australia. And I suspect something we share with Eastern Europe culture is that very thing, that an ability to be frank and respect frankness are two shared cultural values for both parts of the world. And to give an example, I've worked with less teams than Leila, and I've worked mostly with the Indian teams, subcontinental teams. And what I've found is the hierarchy and respect issues do come to the fore. And it's not anyone's fault. It's just how we are, how we grow up and the culture and society we live in. So I found it much harder to get Indian teams. Indians are brilliant developers, but I found it much harder to get them confident to tell me when I'm doing something wrong, and so on. So I'm not trying to profile different cultures or nations. I'm just saying we have to respect the differences and understand them in order to have a successful project. That's all.
Yeah. And so what you're talking about is that sometimes developers can be too deferential, and what you want is them to be proactive. And the big thing that I'm always saying is, you never ask a software developer if they can do something, because and certain cultures do this more than others, but they're going to say, yes, we can do that. Now, they might know someone who can fill that gap in their team. That is true. But they do it in Australia as well. But I've just found that culturally, there is a thing about not wanting to say, no, we can't do that, or give you a bit of a roadmap of how they're going to acquire a skill that they don't have, that sort of thing. So whenever I ask anything, I always ask if they can do it, and if they say yes, I say when. And
that's it's okay to say no would be the message there, because we're not expecting them to know everything. You'd rather them again have the sort of relationship with you to be able to say, well, I can't do that. We need to have a workaround, or come to a different arrangement.
Nigel, can I share an example of someone I've admired from afar, but know quite well too, who I think has been a very good CEO and worked with developers very well, and has a couple of characteristics. So these characteristics are that, in fact, it's interesting because this fellow is a Scot as well, Leila, but he's based in California now, based in Texas, and he's in the learning management system EdTech area, so my area I'm familiar with. And I think he's built one of the best LMSs on the market nowadays, and his development disciplines have been great. His name's Graham Glass, and his company is called Neo or Matrix or Cypher Learning, I think it's called now. Changed the name a couple of times. And what he does is he publicly publishes his roadmap, and he joins his customers with himself and with his development in the roadmap. So it's a shared customer, company, developer experience of the roadmap, and they do a 3-month cycle. And investors as well. It's almost public, like you can really almost see the roadmap publicly. And what I'm saying that I respect about that is that you don't have to agree with the roadmap, you don't have to like his priorities, but they're very transparent. And so creating transparent roadmaps and you know, good approaches to sprints and achievements, and sharing them generally transparently so that we're achieving the business outcomes. You know, I really respect how he's done that, and whenever I do stuff, and certainly currently with Intrinsic Learning, we're working on the same strategy. So.
Well, that sort of does lead me into another point, which is always front of mind, the idea of scope, and agreeing scope, but understanding that scope can change, creep, whatever you would like to call it. Leila, how would you manage the issues of scope? Not only, you know, founders have different ideas, but technology moves during the course of the development process. So, yeah, scope.
Yeah, I've never experienced scope creep. It's just yeah, no, it's continual. And I think the biggest thing, people do this as well in real life. They do it with their marriages as well. You have to, you know, expect the best but prepare for the worst. So you need to. You need to, in your scoping exercises, talk about what if that doesn't work, or what if it goes wrong, and have a strategy for when things go wrong, or when things, or you know, you can go down a lot of different rabbit holes. And you know, we have a big R&D tax incentive program here just for that purpose, which people may not be aware of, but Australian government does partially fund a lot of projects through a very healthy R&D tax incentive program. And that requires that you research things that you don't know the answer to. And so when you're doing that, scoping is difficult. It has to start somewhere, you know, it has to start beyond the idea. But it has to be, we've talked about this a lot in this conversation, is the collaboration to develop that scope together.
Just could I pick up on that theme too, and talk about the changing face of things? You know, when I was first building large-scale systems for internet delivery in the 90s, you know, we were still in this kind of SQL database kind of era where we all did you know, fairly straightforward, you know, relational analysis and all that, you know, that kind of stuff. And we weren't so, we weren't operating with such, the scope was narrower. It was based on database kind of philosophy and so on. Nowadays, it's all about media. It's all about experience. And so that's why the whole face has changed. You know, the experiences change every day. Customer experiences change every day. And so we've already talked about agility, but I don't think scope creep's a question anymore. I think that battle has been won and lost, depending on which side of the fence you're on. As Leila said, she doesn't acknowledge scope creep because she's been the cause rather than the recipient of it.
No, not at all. You'd be surprised. You would be surprised.
Okay,
yeah.
Well, I've certainly caused a lot of scope creep, I know, and I do have to fess up to that.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that's the conversation anymore. The conversation is not about what or how much. The conversation is what we're offering to our customers is going to change quite a lot. So how do we manage the agility required in a relationship? Just to repeat, long-term relationships, financial planning together, cash flow planning together, all those things are critical in part of a software development relationship. Again, back to scope, just to talk about this full stack idea, like, you know, what technologies might expire just when we're wanting to keep using them. You know, what's the reliability of our tech partners and our tech assumptions? You know, who's going to acquire that critical piece that we wanted and can't use anymore? Or, you know, that kind of stuff is a conversation that must occur right between suppliers and companies like us. So.
Yeah, and I think the suppliers need to be very blunt with Australians about what they need as well. And that side of things, don't just wait for this specification to come down. You have to say what you need to get the job done. So you have to fit your own methodology in with your client's methodology, but I think Australians can really accept that there might be a better way of doing things as well. Yeah. And
the typical structure of project teams in Australia, I mean, both of you have played the founder role, but have sort of got your hands dirty to various extents. What could a supplier in Central Europe look to as a typical team that would be managing them from Australia?
Oh, you're going to have mainly these CTO, Chief Technology Officer will start, but you might be working with other people underneath that on each module, or where there's typically there are a lot of different technologies involved. And now I'm finding that people are working across, it used to be that Microsoft was on the one side and open source was on the other, but now that it's all, all merged, it's, you could be working with...
You can't, Leila, I don't want to interrupt, but I'm just going to add to that you have a CTO generally who's very, very smart and very well trained, but there is a war for talent in Australia. And so the reason why we're outsourcing is we just can't get people. So don't be shy, you'll be working with a CTO. And I would say increasingly also, one of the things that Australia is weak at compared to American culture, in my view, is the role of the product manager. We just don't train product managers in Australia the way the Americans do, and it's to our chagrin. I've talked a lot with a couple of startup development groups about this question, specifically in Australia. And just to note, there's a very good, in the ed tech space, there's a very good network called EduGrowth. If there's any companies listening, you can plug into the Australian EduGrowth network. It's sponsored by the government and by Deloitte in Australia, and it's a place where you find all the ed tech companies. They all connect at that point. So now the EduGrowth people, and we were talking about this, that there are no good product managers, and there's no universities training them. And if they get trained by Microsoft or by Google or someone to be a good product manager, they're off to the US. They don't stay in Australia, So I think that's an area we need to improve in, is product management, so that this roadmap, this cycle, this customer validation process is weak in Australia. But we have excellent CTOs. So if you're an engineer focus, you'll find excellent buddies in Australia in leadership roles. But if you're looking at roadmap, scope management, customer requirements, I think is a weakness.
Yeah, I agree totally. Yeah.
And anything in particular in Australia that areas of that are sort of trends or areas that that potential suppliers should be addressing? Are we behind, in front, the same as Europe, Western Europe, or the US, or what's hot?
You want a bunch of buzzwords?
Please.
Yeah, we're really. I'm a little bit cynical. But we do have a lot. We have a lot of focus on AI and machine learning. But in terms of industries, the space industry, defense, these are the people you're supplying to, and that's a really fascinating. So it could be any technology. I mean, obviously, blockchain has hardly started, really, even though we've been talking about it. It's mainly been hot air, but I think there's a lot further to go in that space, or in a similar technology. Yeah, IoT and sensors, that is the other one, which goes hand in hand with the space industry, which is mainly focused on satellites at the moment.
Mark, I know you're a blockchain sort of.
Yeah,
your current project relies on blockchain. How
Intrinsic Learning has a planned architecture that is dependent on blockchain, but more than blockchain, dependent on machine learning and AI associated with linguistics and taxonomies. And so what I'm finding is I can't find enough information scientists who are sort of aware of things like linguistics, that kind of stuff. So just a clue for anyone who wants to get in touch with me about our coming development needs, and there are plenty of them ahead. We do have a design architecture, but it's going to need not just programming, but I need really good information scientists, people who can think about big data and managing taxonomies, linguistics, metadata analysis, all that stuff. And so the jargon terms of AI and blockchain and machine learning, that's not it. It's what's underneath is what it like. How do you actually interpret meaning across languages, and how do you actually build out the relationships to secure chains, whatever they look like, whatever form they take, and that's just an education perspective. So what I'm seeing is exciting growth in education now that this terrible virus has pushed all educators and learners online. Somehow there's been a weird breakthrough in education technology. Correct. where there were doubts and doubts and doubts and doubts and doubts, and now no one's doubting it anymore. Like the world is going to change, and we'll never go back.
And the other, just a little addendum to that, is the cybersecurity area for the same reasons.
Same reason, yeah.
Well, leading on to that, I mean, is there an issue with Australian businesses wanting to use Australian data centres, or are they concerned about cybersecurity, or it's not
It's a major issue, yeah. Huge.
And governments and large corporates wanting to store data in Australia?
Especially if you're in defence, for instance.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd say that's yes if it's government. Completely no if it's not. Like I am a rebel about this. In my field, learners are universal, and increasingly nations will have less and less to do with education, and much more it will be much more a universal truth, like many other things. And so in education, again, I can only speak to that. It's less of an issue about where it's hosted as long as it's safe. But that's not always true. It's about whether government's involved or not, to be honest. Simple as that, really.
Yep.
And accessing the Australian market. So I'm sure the audience would be thrilled to work with Australian companies after listening to us. And how would you suggest that they get in touch through, organisations like Austrade? Should they, LinkedIn, networking, jump on a plane when possible? How do you think they could? How did you meet your developers in Bosnia?
A local guy here that I used to do a lot of work with, he moved over to Berlin and he started having development work done in Eastern Europe. And when I was looking for a developer, he gave me his developers, and it was fantastic. So I really, that was a great way, and an introduction is obviously the best way.
So personal networks is an important way of doing business in Australia.
Yeah, and then the other side, the other trend that I've noticed. Sorry, Mark. I'll just quickly cover this one off. Is that there's a delightful twins from southern India who've come to Australia and set up an office in Melbourne, and they come to Adelaide a lot, and they've taken so their team is back in India, but they come here and they really develop the relationships locally, and it's working for them.
Yeah, I was going to make something like that suggestion. I know a very good company in Brisbane who are fronted by Australians, but actually their entire development team is in Indonesia, and all they do is feed their Indonesian development team from Australia. So I was going to suggest partnerships. The Australians have one thing that's unique and difficult, I think, for everybody else in the world to deal with about Australians, is we have this unique concept of mateship, where we like to deal with our mates. And by that, I don't mean our partner or our wife or other or husband or other whatever other kind of mates you might imagine.
There's no mating going on.
No. I mean, someone within you have a bit of history and some trust, or a trusted referral. Leila just said she got to Bosnia through a trusted friend who was in Berlin. We value that kind of stuff. So you can't manufacture that overnight. And one thing I would say is a cold contact, which is not culturally relevant or introduced, Australians are very suspicious of. We get thousands of them, hundreds of them all the time. And it's hard to distinguish the genuine from the ingenuine, to be honest. So you do need a channel to form partnerships. Again, anyone interested in EdTech, I'd suggest get in contact with the EduGrowth network and look to have your credentials as a developer validated in a network like that. And that would be my suggestion. But in the end, demonstrating that you can do the job is another way, like offering to do a small piece of work for nothing or something, just to demonstrate capacity and process. That kind of stuff really works, I think. But yeah, referrals work in Australia. They really do.
And partnering with, would you need a local person on the ground? You hear that a lot, dealing with China or other countries, that, for Australian businesses going there, that it's advantageous to have a local person to open some doors. Are there any people that play those roles?
Oh, there are, yes. I think I've actually come across that more in America, though. Yeah. And the people do tend to hang around co-working spaces, that sort of thing. You can often get good introductions through co-working spaces.
Yeah.
And the large global incubators have a reasonable presence in Australia. Is that fair to say? Leila, you're probably closer to that.
I was involved with the Mass Challenge, so MIT, but the sort of the pandemic has created havoc.
Oh, hey, we've got a Master of Ceremonies joining us.
Yeah, or
that's not a sign to finish. It's just a sign I wanted to join with a couple of comments. We're finished in about 5 minutes. I did want to. We have 5 minutes, and again, keeping this on a tight schedule, because at 10:15, each of the three of you need to be back on the Hopin platform, because you've got people that are inviting you to their meetings, and I've emailed each of you their individual names, but you'll see them in the top right of the Hopin platform. Accept them and keep them into 8 to 9, 10 minutes. Yeah.
Oh.
But one comment I have sitting here in Poland, Central Europe, and you guys being in Australia, one of the panelists on the Japan panel said about getting one client kind of to open up Japan. If you were given some advice to a Central European technology company, how can they pry up the Australian market? Where is the new business coming from? Is it startups? Is it incubators? Is it the big corporate guys? Is it SMEs? I mean, how would they start the process, especially given the fact that no one's traveling right now? But give them one piece of advice, two pieces of advice. What should they do really actionable to get started?
Oh, it's, there's this tool called LinkedIn.
Oh, I've heard about that.
Yeah, and I get approached constantly, but honestly, I do actually read the messages.
Okay.
And a lot of the time, I just pass. But if somebody puts a proposal forward to me that sounds decent, I'll go into it. I'll discuss it with them. And that's, I can't see why you wouldn't do that. It's a very simple thing to do. And it needs to not come across as if they're just selling, That's the thing that would put people off. And the other thing, of course, is to use every connection you possibly can. But what a small world we have.
True. Mark?
Yeah. My comment would, sometimes I would avoid government and trade missions and all that stuff. Is my honest view. I've been on so many and gained so little over 25 years.
Hello to the Austrade people on the call.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. If they want to ring me and ask where they could add real value, I would happily have that call, but they never ring. But what I would say is that this kind of stuff is what really matters. And, this next 15 minutes, I'm really looking forward to. And it's looking for those opportunities of real, genuine, authentic connection about common interest. And I'd refer again to networks. And Leila's talked about find out the, I would avoid government, because government is hard to get into without a local partner, but find the startup incubators. I would just get a list of those and just find some friends and start a networking reference group. Look for incubators, I would say. Yeah.
And might I get you guys to help a bit more for the September event we're going to do for this, and pull in some Aussie IT software associations looking for partners abroad? That's one thing would help as well, possibly. Yeah. Nigel?
Yeah, definitely. And I wouldn't even underestimate the local, Polish or expatriate community in Australia. Very large communities here, and they're very well respected. Lots of developers. Yeah.
Also highly competitive. Highly competitive. Yeah. I've had quite a lot to do with the Bulgarian network here, and they're highly competitive with each other as well.
So, okay, guys, on that note, On that note, let's finish because 10:15 is coming, and I'm going to cut you guys off of the screen right now, and you are on to your hop-in platform, the three of you, and your meetings are starting right now. Bye. Thank you guys very much, Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Leila. Thanks, Mark.